The light arrives before the camera does. On the morning of January 15th, 2025, the first episode of With Love, Meghan premiered on Netflix. Within its opening minutes, a Cartier love bracelet caught the candlelight of a warmly lit Montecito kitchen. The bracelet, yellow gold, oval screws, retail value publicly listed above £6,000, rested against Meghan's wrist as she pressed homemade jam into jars beside a folded linen cloth. Press records compiled by jewellery specialists at The Times and the Daily Mail in January 2025 placed the total estimated value of pieces worn across the series at approximately £421,000. In the jewellery world, that figure belongs to a different register, the Register of Coronation Commissions and Diplomatic Gifts. In this kitchen, it arrived beside lavender sprigs and handwritten recipe cards. Some messages are spoken, others are worn. Subscribe if you want the full documented story behind the jewels Meghan wore on her Netflix show. The 8 episodes of With Love, Meghan were conceived, according to Netflix promotional materials released in late 2024, as an invitation into intimacy, a show about meaningful living, handmade gifts, and the particular warmth of attention paid to small things. Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, would demonstrate how to fold origami flowers, arrange wildflowers in ceramic vases, and share meals prepared from seasonal ingredients. The language of the series was the language of simplicity. Cream linen, morning light through French windows, the soft percussion of pottery placed on a wooden table, what press notices documented, and what jewellery valuation specialists formally assessed in the weeks following the January 15, 2025 premiere, was something the show itself never addressed: the steady, quiet presence of extraordinary jewellery in almost every frame. The pieces did not announce themselves. They did not occupy the foreground. They simply existed as luxury objects do, in rooms accustomed to them, naturally, without explanation. The Cartier love bracelet appeared across multiple episodes, its oval screws catching candlelight and kitchen morning sun with the same equanimity. A Van Cleef & Arpels Alhambra necklace, a piece whose retail value varies by configuration, with basic yellow gold versions beginning in the lower thousands and diamond set versions climbing considerably higher, moved through episodes on a gold chain that seemed to belong to the neckline as much as to the skin beneath it. Diamond pieces by Lorraine Schwartz, Meghan's long-documented jeweler for milestone occasions, appeared in the episodes devoted to entertaining and gift-giving. None were staged as display. All were simply present. The gap between what the show said and what the jewellery cost was, according to journalists who covered the series premiere, precisely £421,000. To understand how that figure acquired weight, it helps to trace the pieces back before the cameras arrived. The Cartier love bracelet, designed around 1969 to 1970 by Aldo Chiapullo for Cartier New York, originally conceived and marketed as a gift that required a screwdriver to remove, carries a provenance as conceptual as it is material. Its screws are not decorative, they are architectural. The bracelet is engineered to remain. In its original cultural framing, a love bracelet was not purchased casually. It was given, locked, and left. The decision to wear one is, by design, a decision about continuity. Meghan has worn the Cartier love bracelet in yellow gold across a long sequence of documented public appearances, predating the Netflix show by several years. It has appeared at Invictus Games events and at charity engagements, and in photographs taken during the period of the Sussexes' transition from royal to private life. By the standards of Meghan's documented wardrobe, it is a constant, not a statement piece chosen for a particular occasion, but a fixture. A Van Cleef & Arpels Alhambra necklace, visible in multiple episodes, has similarly been documented on Meghan across several years of public appearances. The Alhambra's four-leaf clover motif, introduced by Van Cleef & Arpels in 1968, carries an explicit symbolic code of its own. Luck, nature, love, and fortune are the four emblems the design has consistently represented since its introduction. In the context of a show about cultivating a fortunate domestic life, its presence was, if one chose to see it that way, almost precisely thematic. The pieces were not new, they were cumulative. The stated premise of With Love, Meghan was, by the show's own internal logic, about the art of attention. Meghan spoke directly to the camera in each episode's opening, introducing the theme, hospitality, gratitude, the making of something by hand, with a warmth that reviewers described as genuine, and a fluency that reflected her earlier career in lifestyle media and her long-documented interest in cooking and home entertaining. The Cut had published a widely read 2022 profile that noted her ease within the domestic register. It was a mode she inhabited without apparent effort. The contradiction was not invented by critics, it was structural. A show about the meaningful gesture of hand-making gifts, a show that encouraged its audience to slow down, to find value in the unhurried and inexpensive, was filmed on a host wearing jewellery whose aggregate press valuation exceeded the annual salary of several of the artisans and flower growers who appeared as guests across the series. Intentional living as a phrase carries a specific register in contemporary culture. It implies choice, awareness, deliberate reduction. The jewellery was intentional in a different sense. Each piece was a documented decision, worn consistently across years of public life, not borrowed for the cameras, but personal, permanent, and meaningful in its own right. The tension the series created was not one that the show itself acknowledged. It existed in the space between what was spoken, simplicity, warmth, the handmade gift, and what appeared quietly and without comment at Meghan's wrist and neckline, catching light. The Diana connection arrived not dramatically, but as a quiet undercurrent that certain press commentators and royal observers noted in their coverage of the series. Meghan has, since her marriage to Prince Harry in May 2018, worn pieces from Princess Diana's personal jewellery collection on documented public occasions. Among the most noted was Diana's aquamarine ring, which appeared on Meghan's hand at the evening reception following the royal wedding and subsequently at multiple engagements during the years of royal residence. The ring was, according to reports following the wedding, part of the inheritance Harry received from his mother's personal estate, a direct passage from Diana's private collection. In the Netflix series, specific Diana-connected pieces were not individually identified or discussed. The show did not address royal inheritance, royal collections, or the history of the jewellery visible on screen. But for a significant portion of the audience who had followed Meghan's earlier public life, the presence of pieces they had seen before, pieces they associated with her years as a working royal, carried its own residual meaning. The palace's position on the matter of royal jewellery, as consistently reported by royal correspondents, has been that pieces considered part of the crown collection are expected to remain with the institution upon departure from royal duties, though the precise legal distinction between crown jewellery and privately owned pieces has not been formally codified in any single public document. Personal jewellery, pieces given as private gifts or purchased privately, remained with the individual. The line between these categories has not always been publicly clear, and several journalists noted in January 2025 that the pieces worn in With Love, Meghan were not royal collection items but privately owned. The distinction exists. What it communicates is a different question. Consider the Cartier love bracelet as an object of design philosophy before it is considered as an object of value. Aldo Chipulo created the love bracelet for Cartier around 1969 to 1970 with a specific intention embedded in its mechanism. The screws are not decorative. They exist to make removal deliberate, to require a tool, a second person, an act of decision. The bracelet was marketed from its introduction as a symbol of commitment that, once given, could not simply be slipped off. In the cultural context of its era, the early 1970s, when it was adopted by a succession of celebrated couples, it functioned as a secular vow, permanent, visible, announced. Wearing one in 2025 on a lifestyle show devoted to simplicity and intentional living is, considered from one angle, a statement about the depth of private commitment that no gesture of public simplicity can reach. The love bracelet does not negotiate. It does not remove for a photo shoot or a cooking demonstration. It is there because a decision was made earlier to make it permanent. From another angle, the angle that press critics and several fashion commentators occupied in their January 2025 coverage. It is a piece of jewellery worth more than £6,000, worn on a show asking its audience to find meaning in handmade gifts and farmers' market visits. The bracelet's symbolic language of devotion becomes, in this frame, a language of comfort. The particular comfort of not having to think about what you wear, because what you wear has always been there, settled, secured, and locked in place. Some comforts cost more than others. The Van Cleef and Arpels Alhambra necklace occupies a different symbolic territory, one whose roots extend across several decades of European aristocratic fashion. The Alhambra collection was introduced by Van Cleef and Arpels in 1968, taking its four-leaf clover motif from the Moorish architecture of the Alhambra Palace in Granada, Spain, a structure whose carved stone latticework provided the geometric vocabulary for a design that would become one of the most recognized in modern fine jewelry. The four clovers of the original design carried a specific symbolic intention: luck, health, fortune, and love. The necklace was conceived as a talisman. From the 1970s onward, the Alhambra acquired a second layer of cultural meaning through its documented adoption by European aristocrats and socialites, becoming associated with what fashion writers have described as a particular register of inherited elegance, pieces that exist not as acquisitions, but as continuities. Grace Kelly, Princess Grace of Monaco, was among the aristocratic patrons associated with Van Cleef and Arpels, whose connection to the Grimaldi royal family is part of the house's documented history. The Alhambra became, over decades, a shorthand for a certain kind of understated, established wealth. Meghan's documented use of the Alhambra across her public appearances predates the Netflix series. Its appearance in With Love, Meghan, in a context explicitly invoking warmth, simplicity, and organic home life, is readable in more than one direction. For audiences who recognize the piece, it communicates fluency in what fashion writers call the old money aesthetic, the performance of naturalness that is itself the product of long acquaintance with luxury. For audiences who do not, it is simply a necklace catching afternoon light. The press response to the jewelry disparity was swift and, in its dominant register, straightforwardly critical. On January 15, 2025, the day of the Netflix premiere, fashion and jewelry correspondents at The Times published an assessment of the pieces visible across the trailer and early episodes, consulting specialist valuers to arrive at a figure they placed at approximately £421,000. The Daily Mail published a parallel accounting with similar methodology, identifying individual pieces by brand, estimating retail or market value, and presenting the aggregate as a portrait of contradiction. The framing in both outlets was explicit. A show premised on meaningful, accessible domestic life was filmed while its host wore jewellery that placed her among a fraction of the global population. The audience with Love, Meghan was designed to reach the same audience that follows lifestyle programming about sustainable living, intentional consumption, and the artisanal, exist in a demographic space where £6,000 for a bracelet is not a casual expenditure. Netflix's own data on the audience for premium lifestyle programming suggests a viewership that is aspirationally positioned, people for whom the show's aesthetic is an ideal, not a description of existing circumstances. The distance between those two registers, the aspirational viewer and the £421,000 jewellery wardrobe, was noted by multiple critics, not as a moral failing, but as a structural feature of the show's design. Lifestyle media has always operated in the gap between the presented and the attainable. The question raised by the press coverage of January 2025 was whether that gap had, in this instance, grown too wide to ignore. "The jewels do not lie," observed one jewellery journalist in her review, "but they do not explain themselves." Inside the episodes themselves, the contradiction had a texture, a specific episodic quality that a press summary reducing everything to a single number could not entirely capture. In the episode devoted to the art of giving handmade gifts, Meghan demonstrated how to make origami flowers and package artisanal products with considered attention to wrapping and presentation. The episode's argument was that the value of a gift resides in the care invested, not the expenditure. It is a genuinely held position in gift-giving philosophy, one with a long tradition in lifestyle culture. As Meghan folded paper and arranged lavender sachets in the episode's warm, candlelit kitchen, the Cartier love bracelet was present at her wrist, immovable as designed. In the episode on cooking, Meghan moved between counter and stove, following recipes she described as grounding and personal. The domestic intimacy was genuine in its presentation. The pauses, the small adjustments, the warmth of being at home rather than on a stage. The Van Cleef and Arpels Alhambra necklace moved with her, its gold chain settling against her collarbone in the unhurried way that jewellery settles when it has been worn long enough to feel like skin. Lorraine Schwartz diamond pieces, press verified as being among the pieces contributing to the aggregate valuation, appeared in episodes with the same quietude. Not announced, not styled for the camera's attention, simply present. There is a particular quality of wealth that does not perform itself. It is simply there. The show documented that quality in its jewellery without apparently intending to. The comparison that several cultural commentators reached for in covering the series was a historical one, and it was reached for not to demean but to contextualize. Marie Antoinette, Queen of France from 1774 until the Revolution of 1789, constructed at Versailles a pastoral retreat she called the Hameau de la Reine, the Queen's Hamlet. It was an arrangement of thatched roof farm buildings set in a deliberately rustic landscape where the Queen could withdraw from the ceremony of the palace and engage in a performance of simple rural life, feeding chickens, carrying baskets, wearing muslin instead of silk. The Hameau was a documented place, built between 1783 and 1787 to the designs of architect Richard Mite, and the Queen's retreats there were recorded by courtiers and eventually by her critics. The Hameau did not make Marie Antoinette poor. It made her visible as someone who found the aesthetics of simplicity charming. The distinction was not lost on her contemporaries, and it has not been lost on historians. The aristocratic tradition of performing simplicity while surrounded by wealth is not, in other words, a modern invention. It has a form, a history, and a documented trajectory. The woman arranging wildflowers in a thatched retreat while wearing court jewels is a figure who recurs across European cultural history with the regularity of a motif. The motif does not indict, it contextualizes. It suggests that the desire to perform simplicity may itself be one of the luxuries that wealth affords. Meghan's own words, across the 8 episodes of With Love, Meghan, and across her broader public statements about the series, returned consistently to a vocabulary of intention. Intentional living appeared in promotional materials and in Meghan's direct-to-camera introductions. The concept, as deployed in the lifestyle media context the show occupied, refers to the practice of making deliberate choices about how one spends time, energy, and attention, of refusing the automatic and cultivating the considered. It is a concept with roots in mindfulness culture and a substantial presence in the premium lifestyle media sector that Netflix's programming occupies. In 2024 interviews promoting the series, Meghan described its purpose as an invitation to slow down and be present. The phrase belongs to a well-established rhetorical register in contemporary wellness culture, a register that has itself become a premium product, available primarily to those with the time and the economic security to practice deliberate slowing. The jewellery did not contradict this. In a specific sense, it embodied it. The pieces worn throughout With Love, Meghan were, by all press accounts, personally owned, long documented, and not assembled for the show's visual register. They were simply the jewellery Meghan wears. That is precisely what intentional living looks like at a certain level of economic and cultural establishment. The things around you are not chosen for the camera. They are simply yours. Whether that observation constitutes a defense or a complication is a question the show never raised. It did not need to. The jewellery was already there. By the time With Love, Meghan premiered, the jewellery visible across its episodes had already been functioning for several years as part of a larger and more deliberate visual identity. American Riviera Orchard, Meghan's lifestyle brand, announced publicly in the spring of 2024, was built around an aesthetic vocabulary that the jewellery helped to define. The brand's palette was warm neutrals, natural textures, and the particular domestic elegance associated with a certain Northern California register of living. Expensive, understated, apparently effortless, the jewellery Meghan wore consistently across her public appearances from 2022 onward fit that visual language precisely. The Cartier Love Bracelet, the Van Cleef Alhambra, Lorraine Schwartz fine pieces for more formal occasions. These were not styled for individual events. In aggregate, they were a brand. Fashion and branding analyst who covered the American Riviera Orchard launch noted that Meghan's personal jewelry had been operating as consistent visual branding for several years before the brand's formal introduction. The pieces communicated aspiration. They belonged to the upper register of fine jewelry, recognizable to an audience fluent in the codes, invisible as luxury to an audience that was not. This double function, legible to the knowing, transparent to the aspirant, is itself a classic feature of how established luxury operates. The Netflix show extended this logic into 8 episodes of warm, accessible domestic content. The jewelry did not arrive with the show. It was already there, doing its quiet work. The question the press coverage of January 2025 ultimately circled was not whether Meghan was hypocritical, but whether contradiction of this kind is remarkable at all. Lifestyle media, as a genre, has always operated through the productive tension between the presented ideal and the lived reality of its audience. The magazines that ran features on simple seasonal cooking did so on glossy paper, with photography budgets that exceeded the annual income of many of their readers. The architects of the slow living movement built their retreats with the proceeds of careers that required the very speed they were retreating from. The pastoral has always been a product of surplus. What With Love Meghan offered was a particularly transparent version of a long-standing genre convention. The jewelry did not disguise itself. It did not pretend to be costume or vintage or borrowed for the shoot. It was present, personal, and documented, and its value, once assembled by press jewelry specialists in their January 2025 assessments, simply became visible in a way that the show itself had not anticipated or addressed. Is this contradiction, one cultural critic asked in a London review, or is it candor? She wears what she wears. Perhaps the more honest lifestyle show is the one that does not hide what it costs to live this way. Both readings were documented in the press coverage of the series. Neither was resolved. The jewelry, behind its candlelit warmth, remained legible in both directions at once. The Cartier Love Bracelet, by design, cannot be removed without a tool. It remains where it is placed. In the final episode of With Love Meghan, the kitchen light came through the windows at the angle that makes ordinary surfaces look considered, and Meghan arranged wildflowers in a ceramic vase with the unhurried attention that had characterized each episode. The Cartier Love Bracelet was at her wrist. The Van Cleef and Arpels Alhambra necklace rested at her collarbone. The show ended as it had begun. Warm, domestic, fragrant, with the effort of someone making something by hand for someone they care about. The jewels remained. The press valuations remained. The gap between the show's language and its image remained, not as a scandal, not as a verdict, but as a documented feature of the landscape. The kind of thing that, once seen, cannot be unseen. In the world of symbolic objects, there is a category of communication that functions not through announcement, but through presence. The jewel that does not speak for itself nonetheless speaks. The show that does not acknowledge the value at its host's wrist is not erasing that value. It is simply declining to narrate it. The wildflowers were arranged. The candle was lit. In the warm light of a Montecito kitchen, a bracelet caught the glow and held it as it was designed to do, permanent, quiet, and entirely in view. Some messages are spoken, others are simply there.